The heavy scent of damp pine needles and wet earth fills my lungs as I crouch low in the tall grass. Every muscle in my body vibrates with a tension that has become my permanent companion within the Blackwood pack. My status as an Omega means I am the last to eat and the first to shoulder the blame for any misfortune that strikes our territory. The moonlight filters through the dense canopy of ancient oaks, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor. Tonight is the night of the Great Shift, the moment when every member of the pack must surrender to the beast within. I feel the familiar ache in my joints, a dull pressure that signals the impending transformation of my bones. If Primal Shifter romance is your thing, hit subscribe. Back to the story. A low growl ripples through the clearing, vibrating against the soles of my bare feet. I turn my head slowly, careful not to make a sound that might draw unwanted attention from the higher-ranking wolves. Standing near the edge of the creek is Kale, the future alpha whose reputation for ruthlessness is whispered about in every corner of our lands. His presence is a physical weight, a suffocating heat that seems to pull the very air from my chest. He stands taller than the others, his shoulders broad and his stance radiating a quiet, lethal confidence. I try to look away, but something about the way he holds himself demands my absolute focus. Suddenly, Kale turns his head, his golden eyes locking onto mine with a precision that makes my breath hitch. The world around us seems to fade into a blur of gray and shadow until only he remains. A jolt of pure electricity surges through my spine, starting at the base of my neck and radiating outward to my fingertips. My heart hammers against my ribs like a trapped bird desperate for escape. This is not the simple fear I usually feel in the presence of an alpha. This is something primal and terrifyingly deep. The air between us crackles with an unspoken recognition that defies every law of our hierarchy. The first crack of a bone echoing through the clearing signals the beginning of the mass transformation. I collapse to my knees, my hands clawing at the soft dirt as the shift takes hold of my body. Pain flares through my limbs, but my gaze remains fixed on Kale as he begins his own transition. He does not look away, even as his features distort and his frame expands into a massive, silver-furred predator. The bond between us snaps into place with the force of a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. I am a broken Omega, a girl who has been told she is worthless since the day she was born, and yet the most powerful wolf in the pack is claiming me with his eyes. Once the shift is complete, the clearing is filled with the sounds of heavy paws and low, guttural huffs of breath. I stand on 4 legs, my white fur standing out like a beacon against the dark undergrowth. Kale moves toward me, his movements fluid and predatory, cutting through the crowd of other wolves as if they do not exist. The other members of the pack grow quiet, their ears flattening against their heads in a display of submission. I want to run, to hide in the deepest cave I can find, but my legs feel rooted to the spot. He stops inches from me, his massive head lowered as he inhales my scent with a slow, deliberate intensity. The following morning finds me shivering in the cold dawnlight, my human form feeling fragile and exposed. I wrap my arms around my knees, trying to process the events of the previous night while the rest of the pack sleeps. Kale is nowhere to be seen, but the memory of his gaze burns in my mind like a brand. I know that an Omega and an Alpha can never truly be together without causing a scandal that would tear the pack apart. The Council of Elders would never allow such a union, and the other females would surely see me as a target for their resentment. My only choice is to leave before the bond takes a firmer hold of my soul. I gather my few belongings into a small leather satchel, my hands shaking so much that I drop my canteen twice. The pack house is silent, the only sound being the distant call of a hawk circling above the valley. I slip out the back door, moving toward the southern border where the terrain is the most rugged and difficult to track. Every snap of a twig sounds like a gunshot in the stillness of the early morning. I do not look back at the place that has been my prison for 19 years, focusing only on the distant mountains. If I can reach the neutral lands beyond the ridge, I might have a chance to start a life where I am not defined by my rank. Hours pass as I push myself through the dense thicket, my lungs burning with the effort of the climb. The scent of the pack lands begins to fade, replaced by the sharp, clean smell of high-altitude stone and snow. I stop to catch my breath near a small waterfall, splashing cold water onto my face to clear the exhaustion from my eyes. Just as I turn to continue my ascent, a massive shadow falls over the path ahead of me. Kale stands on a jagged outcropping of rock, his expression unreadable and his posture as rigid as the stone beneath his feet. He has found me far faster than I ever imagined possible, and the look in his eyes tells me he has no intention of letting me go. You think you can just walk away from what happened last night? Kale says, his voice a low rumble that vibrates in my chest. He steps down from the rock, moving with a terrifying grace that makes my instinct to flee scream in my ears. I back away until my heels are at the edge of the muddy bank, the rushing water behind me a constant roar. I am nothing to this pack, and you know that the elders will never accept me as anything more than a servant, I reply, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain steady. He closes the distance between us in 3 long strides, his hand reaching out to grip my chin with a firm but surprisingly gentle touch. Kale tilts my head back, forcing me to meet his intense, golden gaze once again. The bond flares to life, a warm heat spreading through my limbs that makes it impossible to maintain my anger. You are my mate, and I do not care what the council or the rest of this pack thinks about your rank, he declares, his thumb brushing over my lower lip. I pull away, shaking my head as tears prick at the corners of my eyes. This will only bring you pain, and they will break me bone by bone just to prove a point to you, I whisper, the truth of my words hanging heavy in the air. He doesn't flinch, instead stepping closer until I can feel the heat radiating from his chest. The sky turns a bruised purple as a storm begins to roll in from the north, the first drops of rain hissing against the leaves. Kale leads me toward a small, hidden cave carved into the side of the cliff, his hand resting firmly on the small of my back. We are trapped here until the weather clears, and I can feel the tension between us reaching a breaking point. The air inside the cave is cool and smells of dry earth, providing a stark contrast to the humidity outside. I sit on a flat stone, watching as he builds a small fire with the dry wood stored in the corner of the cavern. Every movement he makes is efficient and powerful, drawing my eyes back to him time and time again. As the fire grows, the shadows dance across the walls, creating a sense of intimacy that feels both dangerous and intoxicating. Kale sits across from me, the orange light reflecting in his eyes as he watches me with a hunger that has nothing to do with food. My skin feels overly sensitive, every brush of my clothing against my body sending a jolt of awareness through my nerves. The claiming heat is beginning to take hold, a biological imperative that demands we complete the bond before the moon reaches its zenith. I try to focus on the sound of the rain, but the rhythmic thud of my own heart is all I can hear. I can feel your pulse from here, Kale says, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that sends shivers down my spine. He moves across the small space, kneeling in front of me and placing his hands on my knees. I should stay away from you for your own safety, but the wolf inside me is screaming for its mate, he admits, his fingers tightening slightly against my skin. I reach out, my hand trembling as I touch the side of his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. If we do this, there is no going back for either of us, I remind him, though my body is already leaning toward his warmth. He leans in, his forehead resting against mine as we share the same frantic breath. The touch of his lips against mine is like a match dropped into a pool of gasoline, igniting a fire that consumes everything in its path. I wrap my arms around his neck, pulling him closer as the world outside the cave ceases to exist. His hands move over my back, tracing the curve of my spine with a reverent touch that makes me feel cherished for the first time in my life. We move together in a frantic dance of need and desire, our bodies seeking a connection that has been written in our blood since the dawn of time. The heat between us builds until it is a physical weight, a golden light that fills my vision and drowns out the darkness of the world. Morning light breaks through the entrance of the cave, casting a pale glow over our tangled limbs. I feel a sense of peace that I have never known, a quiet strength that comes from being truly seen and accepted. Kale watches me as I wake, his expression softened by a tenderness he rarely shows to the world. We have to go back eventually, but for now I just want to stay in this moment with you, he says, his voice thick with emotion. I nod, resting my head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. We both know the storm is coming, but for the first time, I feel like I have an anchor to hold on to. The journey back to the pack village is filled with a heavy silence, the weight of our secret pressing down on us with every step. As we approach the main gates, the scent of smoke and burnt wood carries on the wind, signaling that something is terribly wrong. We break into a run, arriving to find the village in a state of chaos and panic. Hunters have breached the outer perimeter, their silver-tipped arrows and high-tech traps littering the ground. Several of our warriors lay wounded near the communal hall, their breathing shallow and labored. The pack is under attack, and the fragile peace we found in the cave is shattered in an instant. Kale immediately shifts into his alpha role, barking orders and organizing the defense with a ferocity that is breathtaking to behold. I find myself pushed to the sidelines, my status as an Omega once again making me a liability in the eyes of the elders. They gather in a tight circle near the center of the village, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and cold calculation. We cannot protect everyone, and the presence of a weak Omega only draws the hunters closer to our heart. The eldest woman snarls, her eyes fixed on me with a burning hatred. They begin to whisper among themselves, their voices rising in a discordant chorus of condemnation. The vote is quick and merciless, fueled by centuries of tradition and a desperate need to find a scapegoat for the pack's misfortune. I am to be exiled immediately, cast out into the woods where the hunters are waiting to pick off any stragglers. Kale returns from the front lines just as the sentence is being pronounced, his chest heaving and his fur matted with grime. "You cannot do this," he roars, his voice shaking the very foundations of the hall. The elders stand their ground, reminding him that the safety of the pack must always come before the desires of a single wolf, even an alpha. Kale looks at me, his eyes filled with an agonizing choice that no mate should ever have to make. He chooses the pack, or so it seems as he turns his back on me and returns to the fight at the edge of the woods. I am escorted to the border by two grim-faced guards, their spears pointed at my back to ensure I do not try to return. The forest feels cold and unwelcoming now, a vast expanse of shadows where death hides behind every tree. I walk until my feet bleed, the sound of the battle fading into the distance until only the silence of the wilderness remains. I find a small hollow beneath an upturned root system, curling into a ball and praying for the sun to rise one last time. The snap of a twig nearby brings me bolt upright, my heart racing as I catch the metallic scent of silver and oil. 3 hunters emerge from the brush, their crossbows leveled at my chest and their faces hidden behind dark tactical masks. I have nowhere to run, the steep cliff behind me offering only a long fall into the rocky gorge below. They move in a semicircle, their movements practiced and clinical as they prepare to finish what the pack started. I close my eyes, bracing for the impact of the bolt, when a thunderous roar echoes through the trees, vibrating in the very marrow of my bones. A massive silver shape bursts from the thicket, moving with a speed that defies the laws of physics. Kale slams into the lead hunter, the force of the impact sending the man flying into a nearby trunk. He moves with a lethal grace, a whirlwind of fur and teeth that leaves the hunter scattered and broken in a matter of seconds. Once the threat is neutralized, he shifts back into his human form, his body covered in scratches and bruises. "I told you I would never let you go," he gasps, reaching out to pull me into his arms with a strength that nearly knocks the wind out of me. Kale pulls back just enough to look into my eyes, his expression one of absolute resolve and fierce devotion. "The pack will have to learn to accept you, because I am never going back without my mate by my side," he declares. He leans down, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin of my shoulder where the bond is most vulnerable. I tilt my head back, offering him the space he needs to complete the final step of our union. The bite is a sharp, stinging pain that quickly melts into a wave of pure euphoria, the mark of the alpha settling into my skin like a crown. Our souls entwine in a permanent embrace, a connection that no law or elder can ever hope to sever. We stand together in the quiet forest, the first rays of dawn painting the leaves in shades of gold and crimson. The path ahead of us is uncertain, and there will undoubtedly be more battles to fight before we find true peace. However, as I look at the mark on my shoulder, and then into the eyes of the man who risked everything for me, I know that I am no longer just a broken Omega. I am the mate of the Alpha, a wolf who has found her strength in the arms of the one who saw her worth. Together, we turn back toward the Packlands, ready to reclaim our home and build a future where love is the only rank that matters. The engine of the stolen truck idles roughly beneath me, sending vibrations through the worn leather seat that match the frantic rhythm of my pulse. I grip the steering wheel until my knuckles turn white, staring at the winding dirt road that leads away from the Blackwood territory and toward the human world I have only seen in maps. My breath hitches in my throat because I know that the moment I cross the invisible boundary of the Packlands, I will be a rogue, a wolf without a home or protection. The scent of kale lingers on the passenger seat, a heady mix of cedar and cold rain that threatens to break my resolve before I even put the vehicle in gear. I cannot stay here and watch the pack elders tear him apart for choosing an Omega as his mate, nor can I endure the way the other wolves look at me with such naked hatred. I shift the truck into drive and press my foot onto the accelerator, feeling the tires bite into the gravel as I surge forward into the darkness. The trees blur past me like skeletal fingers, reaching out to pull me back into the shadows of the forest. My mind races with the memory of Cale's face when he found me by the creek, his golden eyes burning with a possessive fire that terrified and enthralled me all at once. He told me that I belonged to him, that no law of the pack could keep us apart, but he does not understand the depth of the malice directed at us. I glance at the rearview mirror and see nothing but the receding glow of the pack house lights, a flickering reminder of the life I am leaving behind. The mark on my shoulder thrums with a low, rhythmic heat, a physical tether that connects my soul to his across the distance. The road narrows as I climb higher into the mountains, the air growing thinner and colder with every mile I put between myself and the Alpha's reach. I know that Cale will realize I am gone the moment he wakes and finds the bed empty, and his howl will shake the very foundations of the valley. He is a predator by nature and an alpha by blood, which means he will never stop hunting me until I am back under his thumb. I reach out to turn on the radio to drown out the sound of my own frantic thoughts, but the static only serves to heighten my sense of isolation. The headlights cut a narrow path through the mist that has begun to roll off the peaks, obscuring the sharp turns and steep drops that line the mountain pass. Suddenly, a massive shape streaks across the road, and I slam on the brakes, sending the truck into a terrifying skid toward the edge of the ravine. My heart hammers against my ribs as the vehicle comes to a jarring halt, the front tires dangling precariously over the rocky drop. I gasp for air, my hands shaking so violently that I can barely unbuckle my seatbelt to escape the cabin. Through the windshield, I see a pair of glowing amber eyes staring back at me from the darkness of the tree line. It is not Cale, but one of his enforcers, a wolf whose loyalty to the pack laws outweighs any respect he might have for his alpha's mate. I scramble out of the truck and stumble into the brush, my instinct for survival overriding the pain in my bruised shoulder. The forest is alive with the sounds of the hunt, the snapping of twigs, and the heavy thud of paws against the damp earth. I run blindly through the thicket, my lungs burning as I struggle to maintain my pace against the uneven terrain. I can hear the enforcer closing in behind me, his breath a ragged snarl that echoes through the silent trees. I am an Omega, smaller and slower than the warriors of the pack, but the desperation of a trapped animal gives me a burst of speed I didn't know I possessed. I reach a clearing where the moonlight spills across a frozen pond, and I realize with a jolt of horror that I have nowhere left to run. The enforcer emerges from the shadows, his fur matted with burrs and his teeth bared in a silent threat. He shifts back into his human form with a sickening crack of bones, standing before me with a cold expression that mirrors the winter air. He tells me that I am a disgrace to the Blackwood name, and that Cale's obsession with me is a sickness that must be cured. I back away toward the edge of the ice, my boots slipping on the slick surface as I try to find a weapon or an escape route. Before he can lunge at me, a thunderous roar erupts from the trees, and a blur of silver-gray fur crashes into the enforcer with the force of a falling mountain. It is Cale, his massive form bristling with a rage so potent that the very air seems to vibrate around him. He pins the enforcer to the ground, his jaws snapping inches from the other man's throat in a display of raw, unbridled dominance. I watch in stunned silence as Cale shifts back, his naked form glistening with sweat and the heat of the transformation. He does not look at the enforcer he has just subdued, but instead fixes his gaze on me with an intensity that makes my knees weak. He walks toward me with slow, deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving mine as he closes the distance between us. I want to run, to hide from the storm I see brewing in his expression, but my body refuses to move. He stops just inches away, his scent washing over me and grounding me in a way that nothing else can. He reaches out and cups my face with his large, calloused hands, his thumb brushing over my lower lip with a tenderness that contradicts the violence of his arrival. He asks me why I tried to leave him, his voice a low growl that vibrates deep in his chest and sends shivers down my spine. I tell him that I am afraid of what the pack will do to him because of me, but he only shakes his head and pulls me closer into his heat. He swears that he would burn the entire world to the ground before he let anyone take me away from him again. The enforcer groans on the ground, but Kale ignores him, focusing entirely on the way my heart beats against his own. He tells me that we are going back to the pack house, and that he will make every wolf who looked at me with scorn kneel at my feet. I feel a flicker of hope amidst the terror, a realization that he truly does see me as his equal despite my rank. We walk back toward the truck, Kale's arm draped heavily over my shoulders as if to shield me from the very forest itself. He helps me into the passenger seat and takes the wheel, his movements efficient and controlled as he backs the vehicle away from the ledge. The drive back is silent, but the tension in the cabin is thick enough to choke on as we descend the mountain. I look at his profile in the dim light of the dashboard, noting the sharp line of his jaw and the way his hands grip the wheel with possessive strength. I know that my attempt at freedom has only tightened the bond between us, marking me even more clearly as the alpha's prize. When we reach the gates of the pack territory, the guards bow their heads in submission, sensing the lethal aura emanating from their leader. Kale parks the truck in front of the main house and carries me inside, ignoring the whispers and stares of the pack members who have gathered in the hall. He takes me straight to his private quarters, a sanctuary of dark wood and heavy furs that smells entirely of him. He sets me down on the bed and kneels before me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of regret or lingering fear. He tells me that from this night forward, I am the Luna of the Blackwood Pack, and that anyone who disputes my claim will answer to him. I reach out and touch the scar on his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath my fingertips. The fear that drove me to run is still there, but it is being slowly eclipsed by the fierce protection he offers me. Outside the window, the moon is beginning to set, casting a pale glow over the rugged landscape we call home. Kale climbs onto the bed beside me and pulls me into his arms, his body a solid wall of warmth against the chill of the night. He whispers promises of a future where we don't have to hide, where the laws of the pack are rewritten to honor the mate bond above all else. I close my eyes and let out a breath I feel like I've been holding since the moment we met, allowing myself to sink into the safety of his embrace. We are far from safe, and the disapproval of the elders will surely turn into open rebellion soon. But for now, I am exactly where I am meant to be. The road ahead is uncertain and filled with shadows, but as long as Kale is by my side, I know I can face whatever challenges the pack throws our way. I wake the next morning to the sound of raised voices echoing from the courtyard below, the harsh tones of the elders cutting through the quiet of the room. Kale is already standing by the window, his back to me as he watches the gathering crowd with a grim expression. He turns when he hears me move, his features softening only slightly as he crosses the floor to reach my side. Kale places a heavy hand on my shoulder, and the heat of his palm seeps through my thin shirt, grounding me against the rising panic that threatens to swallow my resolve. I can hear the Alpha's voice booming from the cobblestones below, demanding that Kale release the Omega he has claimed without the Council's consent. My heart hammers against my ribs like a trapped bird, because I know that my presence here is a direct challenge to the ancient laws of the Blackwood Pack. Kale leans down until his forehead rests against mine, and his scent of cedar and wood smoke wraps around me like a protective shroud. He tells me that we cannot stay in this house any longer, for the elders are preparing to storm the gates and take me back to the pits. I watch as Kale grabs a small leather bag from the chair, throwing in a few supplies while his eyes remain fixed on the door. He moves with a predatory grace that reminds me he is not just a man, but the strongest warrior this pack has ever produced. I follow Kale down the back servants' staircase, our footsteps muffled by the thick rugs that line the narrow hallway. We reach the heavy oak door leading to the stables, and the cool morning air hits my face with a sharpness that makes me shiver. Kale leads me toward a dark SUV parked in the shadows of the stone archway, and he tosses the bag into the back seat before ushering me into the passenger side. I buckle my seatbelt with trembling fingers while Kale climbs behind the wheel and cranks the engine into a low, rumbling growl. He shifts the car into gear and guns the engine, sending gravel flying as we tear away from the estate just as the first of the pack guards rounds the corner. I look back through the rear window and see the blurred shapes of shifting wolves, their fur bristling as they begin the hunt. Kale keeps his eyes locked on the winding mountain road, his knuckles white as he grips the steering wheel with intense focus. The trees blur past us in a smear of dark green and gray, and I feel the weight of the pack's disapproval pressing down on my chest. Kale reaches over and takes my hand, his fingers lacing through mine in a silent promise that he will not let them take me. We are heading toward the northern border, a place where the forest grows thick and the terrain becomes treacherous for those who do not know the hidden paths. I ask Kale where we will go once we cross the boundary, but he only shakes his head and tells me that survival is our only priority for now. The sound of howling echoes through the valley behind us, a chilling reminder that the Alpha has called for our capture. I realize that Kale is risking his entire legacy and is standing within the hierarchy just to keep an Omega like me by his side. The road begins to steepen as we climb higher into the jagged peaks, and the engine of the car strains against the incline. Kale suddenly swerves the vehicle off the main road and onto a narrow dirt track that is barely visible beneath the overgrowth. Branches scrape against the sides of the car like claws, and I huddle deeper into my seat as the shadows of the forest close in around us. Kale explains that the main road is likely blocked by the pack scouts, so we must take the old logging trails to reach the sanctuary. I watch his profile in the dim light of the dashboard, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his golden eyes flash with a feral intensity. He is a man caught between two worlds, and I am the catalyst that has forced him to choose between his blood and his heart. We drive in silence for hours, the only sound being the crunch of dry leaves and the heavy breathing of two people who are running out of time. The car eventually slows to a crawl as the path disappears into a dense thicket of thorns and ancient briars. Kale kills the lights and the engine, plunging us into a silence so absolute that I can hear the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. He tells me that we must continue on foot from here because the vehicle is too easy to track from the air. I step out of the car and feel the damp earth beneath my boots, the scent of the forest filling my senses with a mixture of fear and familiarity. Kale grabs the bag and slings it over his shoulder, then he reaches out to pull me close against his side. We begin to trek through the underbrush, moving with a silence that Kale has perfected over years of hunting in these woods. I struggle to keep up with his long strides, but he never lets go of my hand, pulling me along whenever I stumble over a hidden route. The moon begins to rise over the crest of the mountains, casting a pale glow that illuminates the path ahead of us. Kale stops suddenly and tilts his head, his nostrils flaring as he catches a scent on the wind that I cannot yet perceive. He whispers that they are close, and I feel a cold dread wash over me as I realize the pack has found our trail. We duck behind a massive fallen log, and Kale presses his body against mine to shield me from view. I hold my breath as the sound of snapping twigs and low growls fills the air just a few yards from our hiding spot. Two large gray wolves emerge from the shadows, their eyes scanning the clearing with a hungry intelligence that makes my blood run cold. Kale's muscles bunch beneath his skin, and I know he is ready to shift at a moment's notice to defend me. The wolves linger for what feels like an eternity, sniffing at the air and circling the area where we stood only moments ago. Kale remains perfectly still, his hand covering my mouth to ensure that not even a gasp escapes my lips. One of the wolves lets out a sharp bark and begins to move toward the log, its claws clicking against the frozen ground. Just as the beast reaches the edge of our cover, a hawk screeches from the trees above, drawing the wolves' attention toward the ridge. They turn and gallop off into the darkness, lured away by the sudden movement in the canopy. Kale exhales a long breath and helps me to my feet, his eyes searching mine for any sign of injury or breaking resolve. He tells me that we are nearing the edge of the Blackwood territory, but the hardest part of the journey is still ahead of us. We continue our climb, the air growing thinner and colder as we reach the higher elevations of the mountain range. My legs ache with every step, and my lungs burn from the exertion, but the thought of being returned to the pack keeps me moving. Kale stops at the base of a sheer rock face and points toward a narrow crevice that leads into the heart of the mountain. He explains that this is a hidden passage used by the ancestors to escape during the great wars of the past. We squeeze through the opening and find ourselves in a cool, damp cavern that smells of mineral water and ancient stone. Kale lights a small torch, and the flickering flame reveals a path that winds deep into the earth. I follow him into the darkness, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the walls like the ticking of a clock. As we walk, Kale begins to talk about the life he envisioned for us away from the constraints of the pack laws. He speaks of a place where an Omega is not a servant, and where an Alpha does not have to rule through fear and intimidation. I listen to his voice, and for a moment, the terror of the hunt fades into the background of my mind. I realize that Kale has been planning this escape for much longer than he let on, and his devotion to me is deeper than I ever dared to hope. We reach a wide chamber where a subterranean river rushes through the center, the water black and churning. Kale tells me that we must cross the bridge, a narrow span of stone that looks fragile and slick with moisture. He crosses first to test the stability, then he reaches back to guide me across the treacherous gap. I step onto the stone and feel it vibrate beneath the force of the water, my heart leaping into my throat as I look down into the abyss. Kale's grip is like iron, and he pulls me toward him until I am safely on the other side of the river. We exit the cavern through a small opening on the far side of the mountain, and I am stunned to see a vast valley spread out beneath us. The lights of a small town twinkle in the distance, representing a world where we might finally find the peace we have been seeking. Kale looks at me and smiles for the first time since we left the estate, a weary but genuine expression of hope. He says that we are officially outside the Blackwood borders, and the Alpha's jurisdiction no longer holds power over us. However, the relief is short-lived as a familiar howl rips through the night air, coming from the very exit we just stepped through. The elders did not give up the chase, and they have found the secret passage that Kale thought was forgotten. I see the silhouettes of 3 massive wolves emerging from the cave, their fur matted with dirt and their eyes glowing with revenge. The sound of the elders' pursuit shatters the brief moment of sanctuary we found, and I feel Kale's hand tighten around my waist as he pulls me deeper into the shadows of the estate's outer walls. The 3 wolves at the cave entrance are massive, their snarls vibrating through the damp air, but Kale doesn't hesitate as he maneuvers us toward a heavy iron gate that leads into the heart of the sanctuary. My breath hitches in my throat because the heat is beginning to coil like a physical weight in my lower belly, making every step a struggle against the sudden, overwhelming lethargy of my own biology. Kale senses the change in my scent immediately, and his nostrils flare as he looks down at me with eyes that have transitioned from a stormy gray to a molten, predatory gold. He sweeps me up into his arms without a word, and I cling to his neck while he breaks into a run that is unnervingly smooth for a man carrying my full weight. We move through a courtyard overgrown with ivy and ancient roses, the thorns catching on his leather jacket, but he doesn't slow down until we reach a heavy oak door reinforced with blackened steel. He kicks the door open and slams it shut behind us, dropping a heavy crossbar into place just as the first of the Blackwood pursuers throws its weight against the exterior wood with a deafening thud. The room we are in is dim and smells of old parchment and cedar, but the air is thick with the musk of Kale's arousal, which triggers a fresh wave of longing that makes my toes curl against his boots. I try to stand on my own feet when he sets me down, but my knees buckle from the intensity of the claiming heat that is now radiating through my entire nervous system. Kale catches me before I hit the floor, and he presses me back against the cool surface of the door while the wolves outside continue to howl and scratch at the wood. His body is a furnace against mine, and the contrast between the cold stone walls and his burning skin makes me whimper with a need I can no longer suppress. He tilts my head back with a firm hand under my chin, forcing me to look into his eyes, and I see the struggle for control playing out across his rugged features. "The heat is hitting you harder because we crossed the border," Kale growls, his voice vibrating deep in his chest as he leans down to press his forehead against mine. I can feel the frantic beat of his heart echoing my own, and I reach out to clutch the front of his shirt because I need to be closer to him than humanly possible. The scent of him, something like rain-soaked earth and wild musk, is the only thing that matters anymore, and I find myself tilting my neck to expose the sensitive skin of my throat to him. He groans at the gesture, a sound that is more animal than man, and his teeth graze the column of my neck without breaking the skin just yet. The scratching at the door intensifies, and I hear the wood begin to splinter under the sheer force of the Alpha's enforcers, but Kale doesn't seem to care about the danger outside anymore. He lifts me again and carries me toward a large, furs-covered dais in the center of the room, where the moonlight spills through a high circular window in the ceiling. He lays me down on the soft pelts, and the sensation of the fur against my overheated skin makes me gasp as the heat reaches a fever pitch. Kale hovers over me, his large hands pinning my wrists to the furs, and I can see the sweat beads on his brow as he fights the urge to simply take what his wolf is demanding. "Astrid, look at me," he commands, and I force my heavy eyelids open to meet his searing gaze while my body writhes beneath him in a desperate search for friction. He tells me that once he marks me, there is no going back to the Blackwood Pack, and I tell him through gritted teeth that I never want to go back to a place that treated me like a slave. My words seem to break the last of his restraint, and he lowers his head to my shoulder, his tongue tracing the line where my neck meets my collarbone. The sensation sends a jolt of pure electricity through my spine, and I arch my back, pressing my chest against his firm pectoral muscles as I beg him to end the ache. He releases my wrists and slides his hands down my sides, his palms rough and hot against my skin, and I can feel the power radiating from him as he prepares for the claiming. The wolves outside have gone silent, which usually means they are looking for another way in, but Kale is focused entirely on the bond that is forming between us in the moonlight. He shifts his weight, moving between my thighs, and the friction of his heavy denim against my inner legs makes me cry out with a mixture of frustration and desire. He whispers my name, his breath hot against my ear, and promises that he will protect me from the elders and the alpha until his last breath. I reach up to tangle my fingers in his thick, dark hair, pulling him closer, because the distance between us is an agony that I can no longer endure. Kale responds by biting down gently on the sensitive skin of my shoulder, marking me with his scent before he even makes the physical bond official. The room feels like it is shrinking around us, the air becoming heavy and humid as our combined pheromones fill the space, and I can hear the blood rushing in my ears like a waterfall. He begins to strip away the layers of clothing that separate us, his movements frantic yet precise, and I help him as much as my trembling hands will allow. When his skin finally meets mine without any barrier, the relief is so intense that I feel tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. He is all hard muscle and scars, a map of a life spent fighting for survival, and I want to trace every single mark on his body with my lips. He doesn't give me the chance, however, as he captures my mouth in a kiss that tastes of salt and desperation, his tongue sweeping through my mouth with a possessive rhythm. I wrap my legs around his waist, pulling him into the cradle of my hips, and the contact makes me moan into his mouth as the claiming heat reaches its absolute peak. Kale pulls back for a second, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation, but he finds only the same primal hunger that is driving him. He tells me that I am his mate, not just because of the heat, but because he chose me the moment he saw me standing up to the alpha in the clearing. The admission makes my heart swell even as my body screams for him to complete the union, and I pull his head back down to mine. He enters me with a slow, deliberate thrust that makes the world tilt on its axis, and I cling to him as the bond snaps into place with the force of a physical blow. The pleasure is overwhelming, a tidal wave that crashes over me and drowns out the sounds of the forest and the threats of the pack we left behind. Kale moves with a primal grace, his body working in perfect harmony with mine, and I find myself chanting his name like a prayer as we move together on the furs. Every touch, every kiss, and every growl that escapes his throat serves to reinforce the connection that is now burning bright in my mind. I can feel his thoughts, a chaotic swirl of protectiveness and adoration, and I realize that the omega status that once defined me is gone, replaced by something much more powerful. As we reach the height of the heat together, Kale buries his face in the crook of my neck and lets out a low, vibrating howl that echoes through the stone chamber. I feel the release shatter through me, a kaleidoscope of light and sensation that leaves me gasping for air while he holds me tight against his chest. The claiming is complete, and I can feel the mark on my neck glowing with a faint, silvery light that signifies I am now under his protection. He doesn't pull away immediately, instead staying joined with me as our breathing slows and the frantic energy of the heat begins to ebb into a warm, comfortable glow. We lie there for a long time, the only sound being the wind whistling through the high window and the distant, frustrated yips of the wolves who realize they arrived too late. Kale shifts so that he is lying beside me, pulling the furs over our tangled limbs, and he kisses my temple with a tenderness that surprises me. He tells me that we are safe here for the night, but that the elders will likely return with reinforcements once they realize they cannot breach the estate's primary wards. I tell him that I don't care about the elders as long as I am with him, and he tightens his grip on me as if he is afraid I might vanish into the moonlight. The estate is silent now, the heavy stone walls providing a barrier against the world that tried to keep us apart for so long. I feel a sense of peace that I have never known, a stillness in my soul that comes from finally belonging to someone who sees the real me behind the Omega brand on my shoulder. The silence is shattered by the sudden, sharp howl of a perimeter alarm that cuts through the night like a serrated blade. Kale stiffens instantly, his body vibrating with a low growl that vibrates through my own chest as he pulls me behind the solid line of his frame. The scent of ozone and silver-tipped arrows begins to drift through the open window, signaling that the hunters have found a way to bypass the outer wards. I watch as Kale's eyes shift from their usual deep brown to a predatory, glowing gold that reflects the flickering torchlight from the hallway. He reaches for the heavy oak door and bolts it shut with a single, violent motion before turning his attention back to me. The sounds of heavy boots hitting the stone floors of the estate echo from the lower levels, followed by the unmistakable cracks of crossbow fire. Kale grabs his tactical vest from the chair and pulls it over his broad chest while barked orders from the pack warriors rise up from the courtyard below. I feel the familiar cold dread of my Omega instincts screaming at me to hide, but the look Kale gives me is one of absolute command and desperate protection. He moves to the weapon locker, concealed behind the tapestry, and pulls out a silver-etched blade that glimmers with a lethal light. The hunters are not just looking for a skirmish tonight, because they have brought enough firepower to level the entire Blackwood territory. Kale grabs my hand and pulls me toward the servants' passage hidden behind the wardrobe, as the sound of an explosion rocks the foundation of the house. We move through the narrow, dark corridor, while the dust from the ceiling falls like gray snow onto our hair and shoulders. I can hear the frantic heartbeats of the other pack members through the thin walls, and the air is thick with the metallic tang of blood and fear. Kale stops at a small iron grate that looks out over the great hall, and my breath hitches when I see the chaos unfolding below us. Men in tactical gear, with silver-threaded nets, are swarming the floor, and several of our brothers are pinned down under the weight of electrified restraints. The elders are standing on the raised dais, their faces pale and drawn as they watch the destruction of their ancestral home. Elder Silas steps forward and raises his hand to call for a parley, but the lead hunter merely raises a rifle and fires a warning shot into the ceiling. Kale's grip on my wrist tightens until it almost hurts, and I can feel the heat radiating off his skin as he fights the urge to shift and leap into the fray. He whispers my name so softly that I almost miss it over the din of the battle, telling me that I must stay in the shadows no matter what happens next. The lead hunter steps into the light, pulling back his hood to reveal a face scarred by years of conflict with our kind. He demands that the pack hand over the aberration that has brought this curse upon the Blackwood lands, and I realize with a sickening jolt that he is talking about me. The elders exchange a look that tells me everything I need to know about my standing within this family. They do not see a pack mate or a sister, but rather a liability that can be traded for their own safety and the preservation of their walls. Kale feels the shift in the air and pulls me further back into the darkness of the passage as the voices below rise in a heated argument. Elder Silas speaks with a voice that carries the weight of centuries, and he declares that the presence of an unmated Omega has weakened their spiritual defenses. He claims that the hunters would never have found the estate if my tainted scent had not led them straight to the heart of the pack. I want to scream that I have done nothing but serve them, but the words die in my throat as I see the pack warriors beginning to lower their weapons. The betrayal tastes like ash in my mouth, and I look at Kale to see his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. He turns away from the grate and leads me deeper into the tunnels, his movements fast and efficient as he navigates the labyrinth beneath the estate. We emerge into the cold night air near the edge of the northern woods, where the trees are thick enough to provide cover from the hunter's thermal scanners. Kale stops and turns to me, his hands cupping my face with a ferocity that makes my heart hammer against my ribs. He tells me that the pack has voted in their hearts to exile me, and that the elders will formalize the decree before the sun rises. I feel the bond between us stretching and pulling, a golden thread that refuses to snap even as the world falls apart around us. He explains that as the future alpha, his duty is to the pack, but his soul belongs to the woman standing in front of him. The sound of dogs barking in the distance tells us that the hunters are already tracking our scent through the underbrush. Kale pulls a small leather pouch from his pocket and presses it into my hand, telling me it contains enough supplies to get me to the neutral territories. I shake my head and refuse to take it, telling him that I would rather die by his side than live a day without the sound of his voice. He growls, a sound of pure agony and frustration, and pulls me into a kiss that tastes of salt and desperation. The choice is laid bare before him. He can stay and lead a pack that has turned its back on his mate, or he can walk into the darkness with nothing but the clothes on his back. A group of pack warriors emerges from the tree line, their eyes glowing with a mixture of shame and resolve as they surround us. They are led by Kale's own second-in-command, who informs us that the council has reached a final decision regarding my status. They have decreed that I am to be cast out immediately, and any member who aids me will be stripped of their rank and banished alongside me. Kale steps in front of me, his shoulders broadening as he assumes a dominant stance that challenges every man in the circle. He tells them that if they want to take me, they will have to go through the future alpha first. The tension in the clearing is so thick that it feels like a physical weight pressing down on my lungs. I see the hesitation in the warriors' eyes because they have followed Kale into countless battles and know the strength of his resolve. However, the law of the pack is absolute, and the fear of the hunters is a powerful motivator for men who have families to protect. One of the younger wolves steps forward with a silver chain in his hand, and Kale doesn't hesitate for a single second. He shifts in a blur of gray fur and muscle, his massive wolf form dwarfing the men around him as he lets out a roar that shakes the very leaves on the trees. The warriors recoil in shock, because it is rare for an alpha to shift so violently in the presence of his own kind. I watch as Kale stands over me, his golden eyes fixed on his former friends with a promise of total destruction if they take another step. The second-in-command lowers his head in a sign of submission, but he reminds Kale that the hunters are still closing in on the estate. He argues that the pack cannot survive a two-front war against the humans and their own future leader. Kale ignores him and nudges me with his large head, urging me to climb onto his back so we can make our escape. I scramble onto his fur, gripping the thick mane at his neck as he turns and bolts into the deep forest. The wind whips past my face and the branches claw at my clothes, but I feel a strange sense of freedom as the estate fades into the distance. We are no longer bound by the stifling rules of the Blackwood hierarchy or the expectations of the elders who would sacrifice me for a moment of peace. Kale runs with a tireless, rhythmic gait that eats up the miles, his paws thudding against the damp earth in a steady heartbeat. I can feel his thoughts through the thin veil of our connection, and they are filled with a fierce, protective love that drowns out the fear of the unknown. We reach a high ridge overlooking the valley just as the first light of dawn begins to bleed across the horizon. Kale stops and shifts back into his human form, his skin steaming in the cool morning air as he pulls me into his arms. We look back at the smoke rising from the estate, knowing that the world we once knew is gone forever. He tells me that we are now rogues, hunted by both the humans who hate us and the pack that betrayed us. I lean my head against his shoulder and tell him that as long as I am with Kale, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. He looks down at me and promises that he will build a new life for us, one where the word Omega carries no weight and where we are defined by our own choices. We begin the long descent into the valley, moving toward the shadows of the mountains where the hunters rarely venture. Every step away from the Blackwood lands is a step toward a future that is uncertain and dangerous. The crunch of dry leaves under my boots sounds like bones snapping in the silence of the valley, and I keep my hand locked firmly in Kale's as we navigate the treacherous slope. Behind us, the high ridges of the Blackwood territory are silhouetted against a blood-red moon, but I refuse to look back at the home that just cast me out like refuse. Kale's grip is a grounding force, his palm warm and calloused against mine, and I can feel the low thrum of his inner wolf vibrating through his skin. He has abandoned his title, his pride, and his birthright to walk into this darkness with me, and the weight of his sacrifice presses against my chest until it becomes difficult to draw a full breath. We reach the base of the ravine where the mist clings to the ground in thick, swirling ribbons, and Kale pauses to scent the air with a sharp, predatory focus that makes his nostrils flare. The wind shifts suddenly, carrying the acrid stench of silver and gunpowder, and I feel Kale's body go rigid beside me as he pulls me behind the broad trunk of an ancient hemlock. My heart hammers against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I strain my ears to hear anything over the rushing of the nearby creek. A metallic click echoes from the brush 50 yards ahead, and I realize with a jolt of terror that the hunters have already moved past the pack borders to intercept any stragglers. Kale leans down to whisper against my ear, his breath hot and smelling of mint and wild earth, and he tells me to stay low and move only when he gives the signal. I watch as his eyes bleed from brown to a piercing, luminous gold, and the muscles in his shoulders bunch with a power that the Blackwood elders were fools to let go. He steps out from the shadow of the tree with a grace that is entirely lethal, and I huddle into the roots, praying to the moon that we aren't walking into a slaughter. A flash of light erupts from the thicket, followed by the deafening crack of a rifle, and I scream Kale's name as he lunges forward into a blur of silver-gray fur. He does not wait for the second shot, but instead closes the distance in 3 massive bounds that shake the very earth beneath my feet. I see the flash of a silver blade in the hand of a man dressed in tactical gear, but Kale is faster, and his jaws snap shut around the hunter's forearm with a sickening crunch. The man howls in agony, and the smell of fresh blood hits my senses, triggering a primal instinct in my Omega soul that demands I either fight or flee. I choose to move, scrambling out from my hiding spot to scan the perimeter for more threats while Kale finishes the first attacker. 2 more figures emerge from the fog, their faces obscured by dark masks, and they raise their weapons with a cold, calculated precision that tells me they are not mere amateurs. I grab a heavy, jagged stone from the creek bed and hurl it with all the desperation of a woman who has nothing left to lose. The rock catches the closest hunter in the temple, dazing him long enough for Kale to pivot and sweep the man's legs out from under him with a powerful blow. The second hunter fires a pistol, and I feel the heat of the bullet as it grazes my upper arm, leaving a stinging trail of fire across my skin. Kale lets out a roar that vibrates in my very marrow, and he shifts back into his human form just long enough to wrench the gun from the man's hand and snap his wrist like a dry twig. The violence is swift and brutal, leaving the clearing filled with the heavy scent of copper and the low moans of the defeated men. Kale turns to me, his chest heaving and his face splattered with crimson, and he checks my arm with a frantic intensity that borders on panic. He rips a strip of fabric from his own shirt and binds my wound with trembling fingers, and I can see the guilt swimming in his golden gaze as he realizes how close he came to losing me. I tell him that I am fine and that we cannot stay here because the sound of the gunshots will surely draw the rest of the hunting party to our location. He nods, his jaw set in a hard line of determination, and he pulls me toward a narrow goat path that leads upward into the jagged peaks of the gray spires. We climb for hours, our lungs burning from the thinning air and the relentless pace, but Kale does not slow down until we reach a hidden cave tucked behind a frozen waterfall. The interior is cold and damp, but it offers a temporary sanctuary from the predators who are currently scouring the valley floor for our heads. Kale pushes a heavy boulder across the narrow entrance to mask our scent and block the wind, and then he finally collapses against the stone wall, pulling me into the heat of his lap. I bury my face in the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of him that has become my only sense of safety in a world that wants us dead. He strokes my hair with a gentleness that contrasts sharply with the violence he just unleashed, and he promises me that the Blackwood pack will never lay a hand on me again. I ask him if he regrets leaving his people, and he tilts my chin up so that I am forced to look into the depths of his unwavering eyes. He tells me that a pack that would sacrifice its own for the sake of a hollow peace is no longer a pack he wishes to lead. We sit in the darkness, the only sound being the steady drip of water from the ceiling and the rhythmic beating of our hearts, and I realize that we are truly alone for the first time in our lives. The hunters are still out there, and the wilderness is a cruel master, but as long as Kale is holding me, the fear does not consume me. As the first light of dawn begins to bleed through the cracks in the cave entrance, Kale stands and begins to sharpen a piece of flint against the floor. He explains that we need to find the rogue settlements in the north, places where the law of the alpha does not reach, and the scent of the hunters will be lost among the pines. I watch the steady movement of his hands as he works, the muscles in his shoulders rippling beneath skin that still bears the faint, silver scars of our escape. The cave is cold and damp, but the heat radiating from Kale acts as a beacon that draws me closer until I am sitting right at his side. He stops his sharpening for a moment to look at me, and I see the golden flicker in his eyes that signals the wolf is never far beneath the surface. We cannot stay here much longer because the silver bullet hunters are relentless, and they will have tracked the blood I lost during the skirmish at the tree line. Kale reaches out to touch the bandage on my arm, his fingers lingering with a possessiveness that makes my pulse jump against my skin. The North is dangerous for an Omega who has not yet fully come into her power, Kale says, while his voice vibrates deep in his chest, but I will not let them lay a finger on you again. I nod because I know he means every word, and the bond between us thrums like a live wire that connects our very souls. He helps me to my feet, and we gather what little supplies we manage to scavenge from the hunters' fallen packs before stepping out into the biting morning air. The forest is quiet, almost too quiet, as if the birds and small creatures are holding their breath in anticipation of the violence that follows our trail. We move with a synchronized grace that comes from weeks of running together, and I find myself matching his long strides as we climb the rocky incline toward the hidden pass. As we reach the summit of the first ridge, Kale pauses and tilts his head to catch the shifting wind that carries the scent of wood smoke and wet iron. He growls low in his throat, a sound of pure animal warning, and I realize that the hunters have managed to circle around the eastern flank to cut us off. We have to move faster and stay off the main trails if we want to reach the rogue settlements before the sun reaches its zenith. Kale takes my hand and pulls me into a dense thicket of brambles that tears at my clothes, but I do not complain because the alternative is a silver cage and a slow death. We descend into a narrow ravine where the shadows are thick and the ground is slick with moss that threatens to steal my footing at every turn. Kale stops suddenly and pushes me behind a massive cedar tree while he drops into a low crouch with his claws extended and ready for a fight. I hear the crunch of boots on dry leaves and the metallic click of a safety being disengaged just a few yards away from our hiding spot. Two men in tactical gear emerge from the mist, their eyes scanning the undergrowth with a cold efficiency that tells me they are veterans of the Great Purge. Kale does not wait for them to spot us, but instead lunges forward with a roar that echoes through the ravine and sends the birds screaming into the sky. He hits the first hunter with the force of a falling mountain, and I watch as the man is thrown backward into a jagged rock face with a sickening thud. The second hunter raises his rifle to fire, but I find a strength I didn't know I possessed and lunges at his knees to knock his aim wide. The silver bullet whistles past Kale's ear and embeds itself in a tree trunk with a hiss of burning wood while I scramble to regain my balance. Kale is on the man in an instant, his teeth bared and his eyes glowing with a predatory light that strikes fear into the heart of our enemy. He finishes the threat with a swiftness that is both terrifying and beautiful to behold, and then he turns back to me to ensure I am unharmed. He checks my face and hands for new injuries, and when he finds none, he pulls me into a crushing embrace that smells of pine and adrenaline. "We are close now, Astrid," Kale whispers against my hair, while his heart hammers a frantic rhythm against my own ribs. We leave the bodies behind and push deeper into the northern wilderness where the trees grow taller, and the air becomes thin and sharp. The landscape changes from rolling hills to jagged cliffs that overlook a valley shrouded in a permanent gray mist. This is the edge of the no man's land, a place where the pack laws are forgotten and only the strongest survive the harsh winters. Kale leads me toward a hidden path that winds behind a frozen waterfall, and I feel a shift in the atmosphere as if we are crossing an invisible boundary. We emerge into a small clearing where several low-slung cabins are built directly into the side of the mountain to hide them from aerial surveillance. A group of men and women dressed in furs and heavy leathers emerge from the shadows, their eyes wary and their postures defensive as they evaluate the newcomers. Kale steps forward and raises his hand in a gesture of peace, but he keeps his other arm firmly around my waist to signal that I am under his protection. A tall woman with gray hair and a scar running down her cheek approaches us, her gaze lingering on the bite mark Kale left on my neck during the heat of the rescue. "Kale of the Blackwood Pack," the woman says with a voice that sounds like grinding stones, "we heard you had gone rogue for the sake of an Omega." Kale narrows his eyes and tightens his grip on me, but he does not back down from the challenge in her tone. He explains that the hunters are right on our heels and that we need a place to rest and regroup before the final confrontation. The woman looks at me for a long time, searching for a weakness she can exploit, but I meet her gaze with a steady defiance that seems to earn her Grudiant respect. She gestures for us to follow her into the largest cabin where a fire is roaring in a stone hearth, and the smell of roasting meat fills the air. Inside the cabin, The warmth is overwhelming after the hours we spent in the cold, and I feel my muscles finally begin to relax. Kale sits me down on a wooden bench near the hearth and stays close enough that I can feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. The hunters who brought us here move with a practiced efficiency that suggests they have done this many times before, yet the tension in the room remains thick enough to choke on. Kale places a heavy hand on my knee, and his thumb brushes against my skin in a way that grounds me despite the chaos swirling outside the cabin walls. We are not safe yet, and the silver shackles on the table across from us serve as a grim reminder of what these people are capable of doing to our kind. The woman who led us inside stands by the fire and watches us with eyes that have seen too much blood spilled in this forest. Kale leans toward me and whispers that we must be ready to move the moment the moon hits its peak, because that is when the hunters will be most distracted by the shifting of the younger wolves. I nod my head because I understand the stakes, and I can feel the beast within Kale pacing restlessly beneath his skin. My own wolf is silent but alert, waiting for the signal to break free from the fear that has held us captive for so long. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door bursts open, and a man covered in grime and sweat stumbles into the room with news that the rest of the pack has been spotted near the northern ridge. Kale stands up instantly, and the sheer power of his presence makes the hunters reach for their weapons even though we are supposed to be in a temporary truce. He looks at me and reaches out to pull me to my feet, and I see the gold in his eyes flashing with a predatory intensity that tells me the time for hiding is over. We move toward the exit as the hunters begin to scramble for their gear, and the cold night air hits my face like a physical blow when we step back onto the porch. The sound of howling erupts from the trees, and it is not the sound of a peaceful shift, but the cry of a pack ready for war. Kale grips my hand and pulls me toward the tree line because he knows the hunters will turn on us the moment the first drop of blood is shed. We run through the undergrowth, and the branches tear at my clothes as we push deeper into the territory that should have been our sanctuary. Kale stops abruptly in a small clearing where the moonlight is brightest, and he turns to face me with an expression that is both terrifying and beautiful. He tells me that he will not let them take me again, and then he leans down and sinks his teeth into the junction of my neck and shoulder. The pain is sharp and sudden, but it is quickly replaced by a wave of heat that binds our souls together forever. I am his, and Kale is mine, and the bond is finally complete as the forest around us explodes into violence. Silver-tipped arrows hiss through the air and thud into the ancient bark of the surrounding trees as the hunters emerge from the shadows. Kale pulls his teeth from my skin, and the metallic tang of my blood lingers in the air, while the new bond thrums through my veins like liquid fire. My vision sharpens until I can see every individual leaf trembling in the wind, and I realize that my senses are now tethered to his primal strength. Kale let out a low, guttural growl that vibrates against my chest, and he steps in front of me to shield my body from the encroaching threat. The lead hunter raises a crossbow with a sneer of cold determination, but Kale moves with a speed that defies human logic and lunges toward the man before he can pull the trigger. I feel the echo of Kale's rage inside my own mind, and the connection between us pulses with a rhythmic intensity that makes my heart race. He tears the weapon from the hunter's grasp and tosses it aside like a broken toy. Then he delivers a blow that sends the man crashing back into the underbrush. Another hunter fires a shot that grazes Kale's shoulder, but he barely flinches as the wound begins to knit itself back together under the influence of our completed bond. I find myself moving instinctively toward him, and I realize that the fear which once paralyzed me has been replaced by a fierce, protective instinct. Kale turns his head slightly to catch my gaze, and the gold in his eyes glows with a terrifying brilliance that signals the end of his restraint. The forest floor erupts into a chaotic blur of motion as the rest of the pack arrives to join the fray. I watch as Kale leads the charge with a ferocity that forces the hunters to retreat toward the edge of the clearing. He strikes with precision and power, and every movement he makes is a testament to the claim he has just placed upon my soul. The heat from the bite on my shoulder radiates through my entire frame, and I know that I will never be the same woman I was before this night began. Kale returns to my side after the last of the intruders has vanished into the darkness, and he reaches out to cup my face with a hand that is still stained with the evidence of his victory. We stand together in the center of the clearing, while the moonlight bathes us in a pale, silver glow. Kale leans his forehead against mine, and I can feel the steady thrum of his pulse echoing the frantic beat of my own heart. He whispers my name with a reverence that makes the air around us feel heavy and still, and I know that our lives are now irrevocably entwined. The violence of the night fades into the background as we acknowledge the depth of the commitment we have made to one another. Astrid is no longer just an Omega, and Kale is no longer just a protector, because we have become something far more powerful together. His wolf's eyes meet mine, and the bond snaps into place with a force that steals my breath. Mine, he growls against my skin, and I feel the truth of it in every cell. I am his, and he is mine, bound by something older than words. Would you surrender to the wild within?